Hey, everybody. Welcome to the official Do Good Better podcast. I'm your host, Patrick Kirby. And of course, we speak with people who are going to help our small and medium-sized nonprofits do good better. And typically, the people who can help our nonprofits do better are those who run small and medium-sized nonprofits. Kristie Wolff is our guest today. She is the executive director of the North Dakota Women's Network, and she joins us here today on the podcast. Kristie, welcome, my friend. Thanks for joining us today. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me. It's good to see you again.
Delightful to see you again. I think as people are kind of scrolling through iTunes or, Facebook or Spotify, YouTube, wherever the heck they're finding the way to listen to this podcast or watch, if you will, they kind of see the idea of the North Dakota Women's Network. I have no idea what on earth that is, but it sounds pretty cool. So before we kind of kick off everything, Kristie, could you give us a 5,000-foot view on who you are, what you do, and why we're talking today?
Yeah, so the North Dakota Women's Network is a small statewide organization, and our mission is to improve the lives of women in North Dakota. And we really do that in a variety of ways. Some of our mission includes trying to get women into office, whether that be elected or appointed offices, serving on boards, really being at the table where decisions are being made. We also work on a variety of issues related to being an advocate. So one of the things that we do we introduce people to the legislative world and give them kind of a hands-on training on how to navigate and be an advocate at the legislature. And then we also celebrate women. We have our annual celebration and award ceremony where we uplift the work of women across our state because there are so many women doing amazing things in our state. So those are just a few of the things that we do at the Women's Network.
I love it. Trying to get individuals in positions, either elected or an advocate, that doesn't make any sense. Clearly, we're in a state that has roughly a 50-50 representation of women in decision-making bodies, right, across the state. Isn't that true?
Well, Patrick, approximately 50% of our state is women, but in legislative bodies or decision-making bodies, that is not true. Actually, right now, if you look at the data, out of our congressional delegates, only zero of those 3 seats belong to women, of course. If you look at our statewide elected offices, only 3 of those 13 seats are held by women. And then if you look at the North Dakota legislature, only 31 of the 141 seats are held by women. So that's only 22%. And we know that when the demographic of our elected officials most closely represents the demographic of the population they serve, we have the best policy outcomes. And clearly, when you look at the demographic of our elected officials, it does not represent the demographic of the population they're serving. And so we also know that women in office, they bring a new lens to issues. Not only do they bring up issues that are important to women, but they also bring a new lens to other issues because of their lived life experience as women. So it's really important to have their voices and their experience at the table.
I think speaking of voices, I think advocacy is a really interesting part of your programmatic sort of system here. And I wonder if you elaborate on that. I think when people think about advocating for themselves or advocating on behalf of, certain things, it requires a level of expertise that people don't think they have. And I think that maybe scares people into not saying anything, which is probably one of the worst things that you can do if you're passionate about something, right? So can you walk through kind of please don't scare me about advocacy in a way that I would want to be a part of this group, to be an advocate. Go.
Well, everyone is an expert at something. Everyone is an expert at their experiences in their life. And those are the stories, and that is the passion that drives policy change and advocacy. And so just telling your story, telling your lived life experience can make an incredible difference. And that is somewhere that, again, as I said, everyone is an expert. A lot of times when we go in as organizations, we hear, well, that's not happening in our state. And so we do need those stories to uplift the data or the work that we do. And also as organizations, it's really important for us to reach out and hear those stories because sometimes we don't even know what's happening in our state. And so we do trainings. One of our trainings is called We Rise. It's Women Empowered Rise. And it's a hands-on day at the legislature where we walk you through the process. You get to meet your legislators. You get to have lunch with them. You get to sit in on policy meetings. And it really just demystifies the legislative process, which really is probably the scariest part of it. And you'll realize also that our elected officials, they're people just like you and I. And they live in our communities in the state, and they shop at the same grocery stores as you do, and go to the same football games that you do. And so they really are just North Dakota residents who live and work in the same state that we do.
It's pretty fun. I love that as a perspective, because you bump into somebody, you're like, wait, they're buying off-brand bread too. Okay, feel pretty good about my life. It's pretty great to see it. Working as a nonprofit leader is very difficult. It is challenges abound every single day, but there's probably a victory or a win that you've got in the back of your brain that reminds you of the work you do and why you do it every single day to get you through the tough times. Can you share a story of success that you celebrate and use as motivation when things go a little bit cattywampus?
Yeah, one of the things that I would say motivates me a lot right now, in the spring of 2021, we launched the North Dakota Women's Network Youth Action Council. We realized that our membership, our board, and some of our work was really focused around middle-aged women and older women. And we had this entire demographic of women and young advocates that we weren't tapping into, and frankly, didn't really know how. So we brought some young people on board. We have an incredible youth advocacy coordinator. She is a high school senior, and she amazes me every day. And when we launched the Youth Action Council, I kind of had a vision for it, and she took that vision and just made it explode. And so we, out of this Youth Action Council, we really saw it as a way to help the Women's Network tap into this demographic. But what's actually happened is they have created their own projects and their own advocacy. They've launched the North Dakota Period Project, which is a project to address menstrual equity in the state. They started Art Empowered Youth Camp to highlight female artists, where they are going to be hosting our first ever Menstrual Equity Day on May 22nd at the Capitol. And they're bringing stories about challenges that they have as young people in our state. And we are really, really excited about the advocacy work that they're doing, the educational work that they're doing, and watching them be so motivated and so passionate makes me realize why we do the work we do, and helping mentor them and learn from them is just this incredible experience. So having an organization where I have these young people, and I also have the women that were fighting for the ERA back in the 70s, all as part of my network, and seeing the whole spectrum in front of me is just, it keeps me going every day.
That's pretty fantastic. There's got to be a challenges abound. It's not all sunshines and rainbows and puppy dogs and ice creams. What sort of challenge is the North Dakota Women's Network experiencing or has experienced, and how did you overcome it or are still trying to overcome that?
Yeah, so funding, of course, I think every nonprofit will say funding. The scope of grants has really changed over, I'd say, the last decade, and primarily over the last 5 years. We've seen grants that we used to get on an annual basis go away or quit doing work in North Dakota. They've chosen to really focus their work on other states or change to other areas. So that's one thing that we're always struggling with is funding, but we're always trying to come up with fun new ways. In fact, we have a fundraiser coming up next week. And so that is a challenge. And then sometimes really data. For instance, with the North Dakota Period Project, a lot of the work we're doing is based on anecdotal stories. And there's just a total lack of data. So trying to find that data or find, again, funding to be able to collect that data. So I would say those are two of our biggest challenges.
A nonprofit leader listening to the show, or nonprofit leader in general, we're sort of just trying to figure out every day some new little thing that gets thrown upon our plate. And we're always looking for tips and tricks from people who are in the field, boots on the ground, experienced nonprofit leaders. Do you have a tip or a trick that you would give the next generation of fundraising or marketing or nonprofit leaders that you can share with us here on the podcast?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's helped me the most, and it kind of goes back to what I said with the spectrum, the generations that are part of my organization, it's really great that we've had these women that have walked before us that I can learn from, who have really made this path for me to continue to walk, but also learn from the generations that are coming, because I know that sometimes I talk to people and they think, oh, they're just young people. They don't know what they're talking about. And the reality is I have learned so much, and we've changed some of our practices. We've even modified some of our bylaws in order to because of what we've been told from the young people that are in our Youth Action Council. So I think it's really important to listen to the voices at the table, and never assume that they don't have something important to say.
I love that. The same way that you would listen to a donor and listen for little keywords that donors are telling you, and just sort of having that gut instinct, is the same people that you should be listening to for mentors and people that are really experiencing your nonprofit and your programs and services that at the same time that you are. And so that's a wonderful tip. I think we always think of like, well, we got to pay attention to our donors. We never pay attention to our internal crew and those who we are surrounding ourselves with. Sometimes we're a little horse blinder on that. So it's just a wonderful tip and trick, and that people are going to want to know more about you. I know that for a fact, but they might not know how to get a hold of you. Is there a place that we can learn more about you, Kristie, and the North Dakota Women's Network? How do we find you?
Yeah, so the easiest way to find us is on our website, which is ndwomen.org. You can find out information about our organization, our Youth Action Council. You can also find us on Facebook at North Dakota Women's Network.
I love that. We'll have all those in the show notes too. So get over here, finish this podcast, go immediately and click on the show notes. While you're clicking around, by the way, if you haven't subscribed to this podcast, you certainly should. Give it a review. It's probably 5 stars, right? Yeah, it is. And then share it with your friends as well. And then immediately go back to the show notes and click on all the links that we have for the North Dakota Women's Network. Kristie, thanks so much for what you do. It's always a pleasure chatting with you. It's always nice seeing you. Thanks so much for what you do for advocacy and sort of being the individuals that are always pushing the envelope forward, which needs to be done in certain aspects. So I appreciate for that. But mostly thanks you for being a guest here on the official Do Good Better podcast.
Thanks for having me, Patrick.